So welcome to this webinar. Welcome to 2026. As you can see, we want to give you our personal impressions on CES 2026. As every year, CES is a very inspiring way to kick off the year. You meet colleagues in the industry. You also see a lot of the directions technology is taking. A lot of new technology, new applications. So it's always exciting to have that as a start in the year. We also saw a lot of optimism when we talked to clients, colleagues, technology providers after a quite turbulent and difficult 2025. So we're looking forward into 26, and we want to give you a little bit of a view of what we saw, what we found interesting. I brought with me, if you go to the next page, a group of colleagues here from the Roland Berger team. We all were at CES. We represent different geographies, Europe and North America. We also represent different sets of expertise. We have consumer, automotive, industrial, electronic, semiconductor, energy, sustainability, and digital. So we all want to give you a little bit brief overview of things that we found interesting, that we think are trends in the industry. We're going to go through a few sets of pages and then about 20 minutes, and then have a bit of time to answer questions in the Q&A session. If we look to the next page, how we think about it, I think it's very interesting to see what tech can do. The way we group it here is really the impact of technology that was shown at CES to our lives, to our work, to our businesses, and also for our planet. And all of these come together in different aspects, which we will go through now one by one a little bit, but you will see a lot of cross-connection, a lot of convergence of different aspects of these technologies to each other. With that, I hand it over to my colleague, Steffen.
Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. So I only have 3 minutes, which is incredibly difficult, putting all of the things that we saw at CES into something that sort of can do it justice. What I'd like to do, I think one of the first things that really drove CES for me this year was that whilst in the past we've always seen AI in some form or another in various products, what we're now finally seeing is that with the new chip set generations, be it from NVIDIA or Intel or whomever, we are actually seeing a hybrid AI move that allows us with edge computing to bring AI into the physical world, so see the manifestations of AI really in real life. And that is across a range of elements. You see it most vividly, I think, in the number of humanoid robots we've seen, be that Cloyd, be that Softbot, be that Switchbot. So there are lots of them that were there, sort of being the most imminent expression. What I thought, and you can currently see it actually here on the screen just now with Cosmo Robotics is one example. What you do see is that AI now, specifically when it's in the edge world, so it's more on a hybrid level, can actually be used on a more sort of personal level. Amazon Bee is another example, but here, because of that, to actually have AI-enabled health applications in real life that have lower latency, that are more on-site with you, can take care of your data in a more personal space, in our own environment, that allows you to, on a health side, to also use AI, but at the same time keeping data privacy and faster response times through lower latency. That was probably one of the most interesting things I saw. If we then look further, what also CES showed, and we'll talk about this quite a bit, but autonomous driving really is becoming a reality. And for me, the biggest element that was in there as well was the range of new brands that you see. I think will be in 10 to 15 years in a range of vehicle brands that we don't, or have no feeling of today. For me, a good example was the Honda Sony Afeela brand, first car in series, the second one already as a pilot, in testing. So that was incredibly interesting to see how that came on top. And finally, one last thing potentially was two things that I found interesting when we talk about autonomous vehicles. It's not just limited to the OEM range and sort of the on-highway, but it also on the off-highway. Bobcat was one of my favorites. It looked a bit like a transformer, so that was really quite cool. So I thought there we'll see advances as well. And then finally, what Edge has also brought, or Edge Computing has brought forward, is things like Amazon Bee, which is the next generation of wearables, which are in AI-enabled. Many of you potentially wear fitness trackers or the like. Now with Amazon Bee, that is another one that is fascinating, having your own AI assistant with you that activates on voice command, that is not linked to a smartphone device. So in that sense, fascinating times, and I think we're at the tipping point of bringing AI into the physical world.
Thank you, Stefan. We'll jump now over to Konstantin.
Perfect, thank you. And I probably need to qualify that my impressions are more or less the impressions from the West Hall, where the mobility topics and everything automotive related has been really concentrated. I'll start where Stefan basically finished his impressions. Autonomy. This has definitely been the center point of all mobility topics in the West Hall. After a few years of a little bit of a lull and uncertain expectations, it does look like we're in the 9th inning, and it's really the final race to scale into profitability. We have seen introductions of the new robotaxis. We have seen huge announcements from large companies, Uber, Lucid, and Nuro. We have seen the new purpose-built pods from Waymo. We have seen new concepts from several other guys. That goes beyond that. Big announcements from NVIDIA, as expected, and I would go as far as saying that NVIDIA is really pushing to democratize access to autonomy, to the data sets, to the tool sets. Also some interesting niche announcements around componentry, like the foldable steering wheel, retractable pedals, some new sensors that come into play. Another topic was off-highway. And this is to some extent surprising because this is supposed to be the Consumer Electronics Show. However, I would say that the off-highway players have been my highlight for the last 2 years. The main thing there is that they actually do bring products that are closest to real life, that are being implemented. There are specific reasons why off-highway players are positioned to push autonomy maybe faster than passenger car players. So the biggest topics around the off-highway have been autonomy and integration of AI agents. And last but not least, the presence of the Chinese players was absolutely dominant in the West Hall. They have filled the gap that the large Western OEMs left behind them. Geely had huge presence with quite impressive vehicles there. So did Great Wall Motor. But that again goes also beyond the OEMs that were present there. There were a lot of suppliers, suppliers that focus on advanced electronics, but also actually suppliers that provide some more traditional hardware like actuators, etc. So the presence of the Chinese players has been very noticeable, and it's pretty clear that they're starting to apply, let's say, soft pressure on the rest of the ecosystem.
Thank you, Konstantin. Really great observations there. And we'll pass it now over to Philip. What were the things that you saw?
Yeah, hello also from me. Very exciting CES this time. And I look at this from the perspective of really the developing technology stack. And what my colleagues, Stefan and Konstantin, have shared is really this entry of AI, of essentially, TCP/IP-based digital tools into the physical world. And had a lot of discussions on how this is actually going to work. And one of the big barriers to entry so far has been limitations on the firmware side. Lots of these physical devices, especially if you're thinking about, let's say, building technology, fire sensors or door locks. If you're thinking about the OT stack in the factories, if you're thinking about maybe medical devices, are limited by the flexibility on the firmware level, on the software that's encoded, hard encoded, on these devices. And we've seen fascinating examples of how this is being handled. And I think, Scott, what you're showcasing here is a startup that I saw somewhere in the entrepreneurial space saying, hey, we're Docker on a diet. Docker was a transformational software tool developed maybe 15 years ago for modern software. It's essentially the core innovation which drove what we today call microservices and software development, making sure that everything is more flexible, more compartmentalized, more modular, and innovation can move faster and at more speed. It's really at the foundation of the current internet world. And ideas like this really allow this kind of modularity to come onto the firmware level and will allow, players to update devices after the time, to speed up innovation cycles, to create new kinds of niches and to apply them at speed, at scale, across multiple footprints and geographies where they might be relevant. So I think that is really, really exciting. And I can see a lot of these kind of things, in these sectors going to software defined as a catchphrase that we've obviously seen in telecommunication networks, but then also in automotive players. This kind of discussion is going to come to these new sectors, which are so far, protected by inflexible firmware. My hot take, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later as well, is this innovation is going to be more disruptive for many industries than the humanoid robot that you're seeing, because it's just so much closer to the cat rules and so much closer to the execution.
Thanks so much, Philip. And next, we will go over to Nicholas. You can share some of your highlights.
Thanks. So, I mean, my colleagues touched already on it, right? AI was the dominant topic. And that for me always starts with the infrastructure or the data center side. So great show from players such as NVIDIA, AMD, also the memory guys, Micron, etc., and showing the current tailwind really in that environment, plus all the equipment maker, and more importantly, also the infrastructure within the data center. So energy sources, battery technology, all the way to fusion reactors to solve the energy demand of further AI training and so on further down the road. So that was, of course, a very dominant factor. However, what impressed me personally the most, and this is also a topic my colleagues touched on in various aspects, is the whole breadth and width of scope towards AI applications. So physical AI, personal AI in your environment, and also commercial or enterprise use cases. This is, I think, also important in the current discussion, whether or not we have an AI bubble, which I will not entertain to the full extent the discussion. However, you see really that the momentum on bringing AI into our life and so on is super, super strong. For me personally, again, the key items or key highlights were on one hand, if I look more on the personal or consumer device space, AR glasses, right? They have been around for the last years already. But in this year, it was just the range portfolio was tremendous. For example, there was an ODM, or I saw one ODM that provided for, I think, 20 brands, various form factors, flavors, designs of AR classes. Sorry. So you could really see that this is kicking in. I also spoke, for example, with startups that do wireless, super low power wireless short range connections between the left frame and the right frame, so that you can have actually no wire going over your nose. So this is really triggering lots of innovation and new stuff coming in there. In the personal space, other topics in the personal space were, of course, exoskeletons, normal consumer devices like TVs and so on, getting AI enabled, or translators that you can carry with yourself around. Shifting the perspective a little bit to the commercial environment or enterprise settings, there I found various use cases, such as AI enabled and smartened agriculture. My colleague showed a picture of John Deere as an example, right? So that's really kicking in there too. Or R&D processes, drug discovery, or also, in retail, further shoplifting, surveillance, and so on, all topics enabled by AI and being demonstrated by various companies. Shifting the perspective here also from a more physical to a physical world, right? humanoid robotics, we touched already on it, quite, of course, eye-catching. But the whole robotics discussion and physical AI discussion is not limited to humanoids, right? We also saw the various form factors showing that there's a huge range of creativity on how to drive AI or like physical AI into assisted living or like shop floor environments. Last note I wanted to share quickly, what we could also find in terms of geopolitics, we found that there is indeed signs of decoupling, right? So we could find that there are various companies that were showcasing end-to-end AI chains from the data center all the way to edge that are domestified or partial or strongly domestified. And we could also discover that in discussions with companies present, that topics such as resilient or diversified or domestic supply chains were actively addressed and brought up by those companies.
Thanks, Nicholas. A lot of key points there. I appreciate you sharing them. And Diego, we've got you up next.
Yeah, so in terms of what can tech do for our planet, I think, of course, one of the biggest areas of focus for me was the energy and water needs to power all this. And first, we heard the impact that physical AI will have in the next wave, which will really reshape the way that energy is used, the when and where. I think it's going to be less in the short term around the total megawatt hours, but it's really more about the peakiness of those loads. And what that means is really a change of the assumption of centralized only energy versus the distributed mix, right? So we see that a lot of the training and fine tuning of these proprietary models will still happen in centralized, hyperscaler GPU clusters. But more and more, the on-device inference, right, for this robots, wearables, exoskeletons will really push incremental challenges to the homes, industries, hubs, clinics, and so on. What that means for the infrastructure is, organizations really will have to think about the backbone of resilient, flexible, high-quality power to develop this. We saw in that regard a lot of products addressing this, bidirectional battery technologies like the EcoFlow Ultra was one that came to mind because of the high resiliency, high quality bidirectional load. And really what that means is companies having to rethink their system strategies, their power system strategies to think about their AI heavy campuses more like mini data centers, right? That need more, will have higher base loads, but will also have to rethink their peakiness, the quality of the power, the resiliency needs, and so on. But the third topic for me is the biggest one on my take on the conference, and it really even shook markets, right? Is the new Vera Rubin architecture and what it means for power and cooling needs, right? We saw that this announcement actually shook the market with the largest HVAC companies being impacted between 2 and 10% in stock price overnight, right? And it's interesting that 2 to 10% because you see how different companies already are positioned differently in the different technologies. So let me spend one quick minute to explain what it means. The simple way of saying it, this new Vera Rubin architecture can serve, almost 77% more users at a fraction of the power, right? And it might not even need chillers, right? So it really shook the assumption that the HVAC industry was operating on, that more AI meant more cooling capex. The new, the cooling technology basically is able to operate at what we call warm water. So instead of the 15, 18 Celsius in and 30, 35 Celsius out, let's call it 80 Fahrenheit, 120 Fahrenheit out. So like 50 Fahrenheit and 80 or 90 Fahrenheit out, it operates at 45 to 60. So that is much, much higher. When you think about we're using warm water at 45 degrees going in and getting that warm water out at 65 Celsius, which is 150 Fahrenheit, at that level of temperature, you can really just reject the heat straight to the atmosphere, avoiding the refrigeration cycle. So that is where, it's good to understand what it means. Because again, from an IT energy perspective only, you can serve the same amount of users with 56% of the power, right? So again, you serve the same amount of people or tokens, right, with just 56% of the energy in IT power. And then when you add the cooling, you can, again, reduce that further to 49% of the energy. And I think, then jumping to water, right? Of course, you're using less water, significantly less water, because you're using 49% of the power. But also by not needing this refrigeration cycle, you're not using the cooling towers that the Blackwell or the Hopper technology was basically a lot relying on, further reducing the water stress. So again, we know how much pushback AI technology, data centers, how the struggle has been for utilities to plan for these loads. I truly think this new announcement will make dramatic changes on the assumptions on what it will need to deliver this next wave of AI and physical AI.
Thank you, Diego. Really interesting highlights there. And Falk, we'll pass it over to you to round things out.
Yeah, so to kind of round it up, I mean, as you might have noticed, AI was the topic on this CES. What we expected last year, which was more the kind of the hype, the aha effect, now really became real life applications. The push of AI into value creation, into making it work in manufacturing, in the life, in physical applications, was really visible at CES. So how do we get there? I mean, there's massive investments in a technology stack, in the hardware and the software. And to justify those investments, they need to be leveraged across multiple applications. If you look at AI applications, they all have the same signal chain. They have a perception of the environment. They have a thinking decision stage on what needs to happen. And then there's a physical impact to the environment, accentuate, drive, steer, influence. This was very visible at the Hyundai booth, which is a picture in here where Hyundai, known as a car company, has invested in humanoid robots, has invested in drones or unmanned aerial vehicles, which need exactly that chain. It was impossible to get into that booth. There was an hour and a half wait in front of it, also demonstrating the interest in that topic. For everyone, it was one of the biggest booths and at the show. The other one I want to mention here is the NVIDIA hall, which was very interesting. I mean, NVIDIA, nobody needs explanation what NVIDIA is. Many of the pictures you see are actually from that hall. And what NVIDIA did here is they were demonstrating their capabilities, their technologies through their customers, through the applications, through the real world applications. That's from the Lucid robo-taxi and other vehicles which were shown there, to Caterpillar showing digital twins for the manufacturing process and supply chain management, NVIDIA showing digital twins for their data center operations, or LAM showing surgical robots. So what we really saw on this show is that the technology players, the semiconductor players with their hardware, software stacks are really creating these ecosystems of technology plus applications around them, and they're building it on partnerships. Yes, they're the underlying horizontal platform, but it is clear that the multitude of AI applications and solutions we saw on the show only happens when those get deployed. And it's when those get deployed through the customers, through their partners. And it's not only NVIDIA just to go there, also others. If you go to the Qualcomm booth, AMD had a big keynote, Intel, many of the other semiconductor players are working on that ecosystem to develop the show. So overall, it was really, really great. We saw AI arriving in the real world with applications and solutions that make sense, that will change our lives. And so we're looking forward to see how that develops. And of course, for us, it is important to also see how the value creation and the business impact is going to become visible over the next couple of years. With that, I think I give it back to Scott for the Q&A.
Sounds great. Thank you, Falk, and thank you to all of you for sharing your insights. Very interesting developments from CES this year, and another big step forward, I think, from CES last year. To all of our attendees, we received many questions during the registration form. So thank you for sending those in, as well as thank you for dropping those questions into the Q&A panel that you can see there on Teams. Feel free to still continue to send in your questions, and we'll see however many we can get to during today's call. But to start things off, Konstantin, I want to pass it over to you and would like to hear from you. What are the 3 most significant trends in the automotive space, especially regarding the software-defined vehicle or SDV implementation?
Great. Thanks, Scott. Let me start with probably trend number 0. That's the attempt to reframe SDV as an AI-enabled vehicle. We love our buzzwords. I'm not sure if this one is going to stick, but it's been kind of the topic of a lot of talks at the CES. If I have to think about the 3 that are really related to SDVs, I hate but to do the same thing, but I will start with autonomy, because autonomy is probably the main driver right now for implementation of software-defined vehicle platforms, architectures, tools, and methods. It's hard to imagine that we can get to high levels of ADAS or true autonomy without switching to SDV. Couple other things that are noteworthy. I think that there is a major change in the reasoning why we're moving to software-defined vehicles. If you rewind 5 years or maybe even a little bit more, the main talk was all about the new revenues that the industry can generate. We're going to sell connected services. We're going to sell functions on demand. We're going to bring in billions of dollars to the top line. I have not seen any of those announcements at this CES. And the main reason for pushing SDVs is really as an enabler for the features and functions and for the new tech that the OEMs are trying to bring into reality. It's hard to imagine that some of that can be accomplished, or at least cost efficiently accomplished, with the old architectures and with the old approaches. And maybe in the last one, I think there is also a major change in how the industry is thinking about the hurdles on the way to SDV implementation. Originally, it was all about the tech. How do we deliver microservices? What is a container? How would the actual centralized architecture look like? This seems to be a secondary question now. And the biggest question and the hurdle for the industry is actually becoming more transformational around organizations and processes of the largest OEMs that are also becoming maybe one of the main reasons why there was something that we didn't see in the CES, but something that everybody was thinking about, the recent struggles and recent failures around SDV implementation by some of the largest OEMs. And I would argue that they can be traced to rather organizational and process issues than technology issues.
Wonderful. Thank you, Konstantin. Next question we have is, what near-term, concrete, and strategic moves can unlock immediate, real business opportunities from this next wave of technological innovation in Europe, and how might these priorities differ across the region? Philip, would you be able to offer some perspective here on this question?
Yeah, I think it's super relevant to understand, what game can European market leaders play given the innovation that we've seen here. And, should we be consulting our European, high-tech companies to kind of build their own humanoid robot and compete head-to-head with venture capital money from California? And I think it's really important that people take lessons from other European market leaders. And, the famous story of Nokia comes to mind, of understanding the implication when essentially an existing technology stack, software stack, got IP-fied, and what the changes are when it comes to the flexibility of the form factor. If you think, the software operating system that runs phones now also runs, watches and loudspeakers and all kinds of other devices, cars. When you think about the organizational implications, I think Konstantin just shared some of the observations that he has had on automotive companies grappling with SDV. And when you think about the ability to continue to innovate on the same hardware device once it's in market, famous for Tesla OTA, but also, your app store on your physical phone is an example of the flexibility that can be provided once essentially hardware devices and form factors merge with the software world. And that's where, this update on firmware that I was talking about is so central, because I really believe that's going to be a key enabler of pushing the limits of where this is possible from first, a standardized device like a smartphone, then consumer electronics, which has a 2-year life cycle, then to a very, very expensive investment like a car, where you can essentially have a computer on wheels, and now essentially going to so many other segments where maybe Italian engineering services are very well positioned, but also global market leaders, which come from Germany, which come from Switzerland, which come from France, which come from the UK. There are many segments which should take real attention into this matter, and that should reflect on, am I ready to adjust the way how I think about the software components that run my hardware, and do I know what's going to happen when this opens up? And for example, Asian competitors, maybe Chinese competitors, innovate faster on the form factor and have better integration into this partnership ecosystem and the software world that we just related to, because essentially more flexibilization on the firmware. And I think, thinking this through, understanding how it applies to your segment, and asking yourself, what can I do to make this happen at scale, is an opportunity to really link back to some of the points that Falkus mentioned. How do I become a player in the ecosystem? How do I combine essentially the strong footprint and the brand awareness and the installed base and the sales and service force with the power of these new software-defined, chip-defined players like NVIDIA and so on? I think there are real opportunities to look at both the downsides and the upsides, and I think that applies for many, many European companies at this point in time.
Thanks, Philip. A lot of major things to be watching in the coming years. And one of the big topics from CES, of course, humanoid robots. So Stefan, could you offer your perspective or share some highlights of what is the latest news on humanoid robot development? Any thoughts on timeline, barriers, latest breakthroughs that you saw?
Sure. Now, CES was both in terms of robotics, either really humanoids, it was also exoskeletons, and then again, it was on various other formats of robots. So robotics really was a big thing. But humanoid robots in that sense, from my point of view, now are at a point where it's not necessarily about technology, but it's more about the ability to put them into practice and have them out at scale. So if you look into, as I mentioned earlier, the new chipsets, I think they now are at a level where we essentially are tackling one of the big issues that you have with humanoid robots in your home, specifically the fact that they observe you the entire time. They are there, they have sensors to monitor you, they have ability to respond and obviously track what's happening in the household. Now that, of course, if you run an AI on this, and it is in the cloud, on the one hand side, of course, you have the issue that you need constant wireless connection, be it via SIM or WLAN. And of course, it needs to upload your personal data into the cloud. That's where it becomes a security and a data protection issue. Now, with the edge computing element that we now have reached and the maturity we have there, I think that sentiment has been covered. So I think that works well. The reduced latency and all of that, which allows you to operate sort of on-site with the AI, means that responsiveness is at a level that we would expect for real life usage. The dexterity of the hands that you can see, the ability to interact with various devices is given for sure. It's not yet necessarily cross-brand. So the LG robots are obviously more triggered towards the LG infrastructure, but once if you look into a switchbot or whatever, it's slightly more autonomous even, I believe. So on a technology level, we are actually there. I think now we're at a tipping point to see how do we get these robots out into practice? How do we expose them to a broader audience? And how do we show that they actually work? It was interesting. One of the keynotes that was given at CES very much focused on how one of the big PE backers to a lot of these AI and robotic startups now has gone into purchasing a hospital in somewhere in the Midwest in the US. Why? In order to make sure they have a place where they can test and apply robots and environment, because there often is a worry coming from organizations or for reputational risk, for whatever reason, to actually bring these robots into action. And I think that will be sort of one of the last remaining big barriers, at least in the developed world, to make sure that you actually have application points for these humanoid robots.
Interesting. Thank you. I'm excited to be able to bring one into my home to help with some household chores here pretty soon, hopefully.
Won't be long. Won't be long.
Diego, this one leans a bit toward the energy space, so I'd love to get your thoughts on what are the leading kind of low carbon contenders for this temporary high power, high energy demand solutions?
So I have to say this is a great question, because it has been the focus of our work with hyperscalers and collocators for the last year. I think the first thing to mention here is that hyperscalers and colos are really focused today on speed to power, right? That's not surprise. And that means that they're looking at all of the above kind of solutions, whether it's front of the meter, behind the meter, and a wide range of technologies to kind of address this bridge to power challenge that they're having. And I think the set of solutions is moving towards hybrid systems, whether it's gas plus battery microgrids, and then that gas means gas that then needs to be CCS or RNG compatible, whether it's renewable plus storage microgrids. We're seeing a lot of interest in and developments in fuel cells, whether it's the solid oxides or the PFCs, the phosphorus-based ones that have some very interesting efficiencies, multi-fuel capabilities, quality of power capabilities. And of course, I think if we've seen the latest announcements last week, some hyperscalers really doubling down on emerging SMRs, right? Nuclear technology as base load. I think the important thing is what it means for developers and energy OEMs is that you need to understand what does it mean, this all of the above solutions, right? And the speed to power is that companies and OEMs need to understand the USP, right? Their value proposition, not only against their peers, but against all the solutions in the market, because that's how they've been assessed. That's how they've been evaluated. And also realize that, all these companies are making decisions not only on the near-term energy strategies and systems, 2030, but we are making decisions on the 2035 and even 2040 timeframes today, right? So I think when we have conversations with a lot of the OEMs, that insight is sometimes very surprising, and people tend to think they have more time to get to market and capture market share and fine-tune some of their ongoing developments.
Thanks, Diego. And for this question, we're interested in seeing where will AI give us the biggest benefits in the next 3 years, so fairly near term. And of course, the question everybody wants to know is when the AI bubble might blow up. And Nicholas, I know you commented on this in your slide, so would you be able to help us with this question?
Yeah, happy to. Let me first start with areas where I believe the benefits are most imminent or are coming up in 3 years, right? If I would order those various topics that we've seen on the CES, and important on CES, we also didn't see any aerospace and defense. So let's move A&D out of the picture. Topics that we that we could see on CES, there I would say the most imminent benefit of AI is the further self-driving, autonomous driving capabilities, right? The robo-taxis and so on. We all know this already from Waymo and so on, are already getting deployed and not just ramping up. So that's for me, and of course are extending the range of the capabilities. I think then next in line would be commercial use cases, like the enterprise use cases that can be, for example, R&D classical engineering tasks or even drug discovery. And here it's less about efficiency, it's more about like really product quality, coming up with complete new products or gaining significant time to market in the process, right? I think this is like a very promising area, maybe not so visually, but clearly could be found on CES. Final one, I think also in the consumer space, consumer devices, we touched on AR and so on. I think there's lots of momentum. I'm a little bit more careful regarding humanoids. I think this is something that will come, or robotics, humanoids at a broad scale will come, but has relatively to the other topics I mentioned a little bit longer time to market, so less imminent. And let's see whether or not it's falling within the 3 years bracket. I think it's most likely falling a little bit out of the 3-year market, depending also on scale. Regarding the bubble, I unfortunately don't have a crystal ball, right? Clearly, from what you can see, it's already everywhere, right? So the implementation, there is no bubble when it comes to implementation, rollout, and so on. What does it mean in terms of financial and potential corrections in the value chain? It's a very rapidly ramping environment, a very hot topic. Corrections may happen in that environment. Clearly, out of the whole portfolio and the breadth and width of use cases that we see, not every use case will be successful, right? So we will most likely see that 80, maybe 60% of the use cases that we currently discuss will be implemented. Some of them will fail, and potentially there could be a correction, but that's a financial impact mainly. I think in terms of AI affecting our life in the next couple of years, in the very long term, there is no discussion for me around this topic.
Interesting. Thank you, Nico. Well, we'll keep an eye on those 3 areas and excited to see what comes over the next few years. We've got one question that came through in the chat. Konstantin, would you be able to cover this? It's around the Chinese players continuing to bring new vehicles, new brands every year at CES, but sometimes the momentum might fizzle out for some of these brands. Could you have some perspective on this?
I probably won't give a full answer, but I'll try to at least start unwrapping this one. And I would agree with the general premise of the question, but I would also agree with that in some specific geographies. I think that is more or less true for Europe, where this is, or that seems to be how things are developing. I do not believe that this is how things are happening in North America or Americas in general. Because if you consider South American, Latin American markets, the number of Chinese brands, the market share capture that they show year over year is absolutely impressive. And unfortunately, the competition from the incumbents is not really catching up. And in the US, we're right now fully isolated from Chinese competition, as they're not allowed to sell in the market. So I think that here we might see a very different trend. And sometimes I fear that our European colleagues are actually facing the Chinese competition now and learning a lot from it. And our North American colleagues, our clients here, would actually have to face fully mature Chinese competition several years down the road, which will probably present a quite more of a challenge than today.
Thanks, Konstantin. And we will go to, I think, our final question here that we've got time for today. Falk, would you be able to provide some perspective on which companies really have the power to compete with NVIDIA in all 3 of these segments of cloud compute, enterprise compute, and physical AI for autonomous robots, and even beyond, if you have thoughts beyond the robotic space? And I think you're muted.
Yeah, there was a question in the Q&A chat as well regarding NVIDIA. Of course, NVIDIA is very impressive right now. They're really one of the first movers in the game. They are the biggest one right now. There's a lot of question around how do we monetize AI. I think NVIDIA has done really well monetizing AI so far. So yes, they're across many segments, across, with a huge head start in terms of being able to provide not only the hardware, but also provide the technology, the infrastructure, and so on. As we mentioned, this is a development that lives through the ecosystem, and it lives through the application in the end market. So it was very interesting to see that NVIDIA was very, very moved in their own booth. If you go to the Fontainebleau, to the NVIDIA Foundry, they were presenting themselves through their partners, through their customers, through the applications that were built on their platform. And I think that's also how NVIDIA understands themselves. They're a platform provider. They're not an automotive company. They're not a robotics company. They're not an autonomous driving company. They really want to provide the platform. They want to provide the technology that horizontally underlies those developments. That's why also I think the question, why is automotive only 10% of NVIDIA's revenue, is because they don't want to be seen as an automotive company. They're really the underlying horizontal platform. So who's going to be able to compete with them? I think one look back to history, we had similar situations otherwise, in similar situations. If you look back 20 years ago, Intel was the only game in town in PCs with 80% market share, AMD a distant second. Well, these days, Intel is, on hard times and trying to find its footing. 10 years earlier, you had Nokia having 80% market share in the cell phone market and lost their view. So is NVIDIA going to be the only game in town forever? Who knows? They're doing really well right now. I think there's a lot of innovation seen and a lot of effort, a lot of investment from other players. If you see what Qualcomm presented, they were across very similar spaces. If you buy a laptop these days, you get a lot of selections with Snapdragons as the central CPU, which wasn't there a few years ago. Qualcomm made big moves investing into automotive, digital cockpit, and also into a autonomous driving stack with their Snapdragon architecture. We see similar discussions around NXP and AMD, which are all investing into their hardware, into their ecosystems, into their software stacks. So I think over time, the playing field will level as the technology matures. And as the breadth of application becomes broader and broader, we will see other companies playing significant roles. It's very hard to predict. And of course, kudos to NVIDIA at this point. They're really leading the pack in the moment. And it's an impressive showing of a company really being able to drive this quantum leap of an industry in technology here. So thank you for coming to our webinar. Thank you for the interest. It's quite a big crowd in this call. Thank you for the questions and preparation. We will make the material available. You see a QR code here. If you want to follow up, please reach out to us if you have more questions or you want to have discussions with the panel members. Very, very appreciative of the interest. As said, it was really inspiring to be at CES. I can only recommend it. You saw a lot of excitement here. This CES all being around AI in various forms. So we're looking forward to seeing that develop, being an application impacting our lives. And with that, we wish you all a very successful 2026 in your personal lives, in your business lives, and of course, in your application with AI.